Hello, everyone.
Hello.
We'll wait for more people to join. Great. So thank you, everyone. Welcome to anyone who just joined the summit. This is our final session for the day. And so in the next 45 minutes, we'll discuss how to support your team through turbulence. It's a program hosted by Anna, our CEO and co-founder at Meander. And we have two amazing speakers today. So Matleen Makko-Boronad, Science Director at Deliveroo, and Danielle, yes, VP of People at Vinted. So over to you, Anna.
Thank you, Manel. And just a quick reminder, we'll have a Q&A session at the end. So if you have any questions to our amazing speakers, you feel free to submit them under the live stream on LinkedIn or in the Q&A section on AirMeet, and we'll get to them at the end of the session. Awesome. So without further ado, Danielle, Matleen, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. And would love for you to do a quick introduction for your career highlights. So maybe Matleen, let's start with you.
Thank you, and hi everyone. I'm Matleen. I work at Deliveroo. I have worked at Deliveroo for 5 years. I've been a people manager for slightly longer than that. And actually, the fun fact that I shared for this event and perhaps a career highlight simultaneously is that when I joined Deliveroo, I was actually applying for a data scientist position. I wanted to do something that I was really engaged with, the technical work, solving difficult problems. And I was offered a managerial role, and I thought I'd do terribly, to be perfectly honest with you. I thought I'd make a horrible people manager at that time. As a result, I ended up learning as hard as I could about how to manage people well, and now I'm so happy to be primarily a manager of people, and that's, I guess, my career highlight now. I'm very happy with the career path that I now have.
Awesome. Daniel?
Hi, folks. I am the VP of People at Vinted. Vinted is a large online marketplace for secondhand fashion and other shippable lifestyle goods. I've been at Vinted for 3.5 years, and it's been a really exciting journey. We've grown from, when I joined, about 400 people to about 2,000 now. So,
oh, wow.
Really kind of roller coaster kind of growth. Before that, I've dabbled in sort of early stage startups, larger sort of scale ups, and actually also began my career as a lawyer. So it's a bit of a left field move. After legal practice, I decided it wasn't for me, and I decided to pursue kind of more of a tech operating career.
Oh, wow. A twist. Awesome. Yeah, we are discussing a really important topic today, supporting people through difficult situations. And I feel like in the past years, especially after COVID, there's been more and more such situations happening, people experiencing burnout, anxiety, and just trying to balance their works and lives in a more sustainable fashion. So let's maybe start with with an opening question of how you perceive the role of a manager when the employee is going through such a situation. Matleen, maybe you could kick us off.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent question, and to be honest, I think managers play a crucial role in preventing, getting through, and dealing with the aftermath of a burnout, and not only in terms of supporting their teams, but also role modeling good behaviors. Managers also burn out, and I have also burned out. And I think, making sure that you don't set terrible example of being burned out and working late nights or working when you're ill or whatever, all sorts of causes that can actually cause burnout. I think this role modeling part is incredibly important, and perhaps more so than everything else, and often overlooked. But in terms of prevention, I think managers should be able to notice when anyone is burning out and know what to do when when this is really happening. So absolutely crucial role.
Daniel, anything to add?
Yeah, sure. So I'd say, I mean, it's critical to check in with your people. So if you sort of notice any signs, even before you notice any signs, like, I think it's a really good idea to have that regular check-in, check-up. In fact, if you, for example, are disciplined about having agendas for your one-on-ones, you could just have a standing item on your agenda that, you know, to surface any issues like this. That so it's not awkward to bring it up because it's just there every week. I mean, the other thing I'd say is, if you're a manager, and depends on sort of, I guess, what sort of manager you are and how much influence you have in the organization, but you may be a contributing factor to that to that person experiencing burnout. So there's a lot of reasons that can that can cause burnout, from, you know, workload being the sort of most obvious one, but things like lack of autonomy. So if you're sort of unduly micromanaging someone, or you're not recognizing their effort that they're putting into their work equally as much as you are for a colleague, for example, those could be very much contributing factors. So I'd say if someone's in your team experiencing a difficult situation, I'd actually check in with yourself first and see whether you might be the problem.
Such a good point. I feel like sometimes people might be visibly suffering, like all the signs of burnout are there, but they do not feel like they are in burnout. How do you approach a conversation with them where you could hint that they might be having an issue, but obviously you don't want to make this conversation awkward for them? Daniel?
Sure. I mean, I'd essentially focus on observable behavior, right? So what do you see, which is objective? You know, I've noticed recently you're always 5 minutes late to meetings, and you seem pretty down. You don't contribute as much as you used to. Would you perhaps like to talk about what might be causing that? So I think that's one piece. I think the other thing is, normally, I think high performers are probably the most prone to this, right? So to be going through something of a burnout, but without being aware of it. And naturally, they care a ton about their performance, so you can probably approach the conversation through that sort of lens. Like, we both want you to be at your absolute best. How do we get you back there?
Awesome. Matleen, anything to add?
Yeah, I wanted to actually come back to Daniel's earlier point, is that this is the kind of thing that I think managers should all, like, there should be enough trust before any burnout situation happens, that you are able to check in on an ongoing basis with someone anyway. So there shouldn't be, in most cases, awkwardness of going, hey, you know, I've noticed this or I've noticed that, and, you know, people's performance sometimes suffers as well. And at that point, the manager can definitely have the conversation. But there are signs, you know, way before people's performance starts suffering. Burnout is, you know, being very, very worried, very stressed, working late hours, just, you know, physical signs. And I think that the relationships that managers build with the people in their teams need to have that level of trust in them to begin with, I suppose. Yeah, that's all I wanted to add. And then the other thing, I suppose, is that sometimes burnout can also be due to factors that are unrelated to work, or made worse by personal circumstances, and people don't always want to discuss that with their managers. And I think it's important that managers also know and are very clear about the fact that they don't need to be speaking to you about it, but there are other resources of support usually available, like HR, or, you know, other programs internally in the company. Hopefully they are in place, and managers just remind people that this is always available. Just an FYI, if they don't feel like it's a conversation someone wants to have with them.
Makes sense. What do you do if you feel like they actually need help, but they are not going for it? So when someone is at the later stages of the burnout, they are annoyed, they are not meeting the performance bar, and at the same time, not actually going and not doing any actions to support themselves. How do you start this conversation with them as a manager? Matleen?
It's really tough, right? Like, it's really, really tough. I think my most notable burnout for myself, actually, when it happened, I went to my manager on a random Tuesday or Monday, being super excited about how I woke up at 4 a.m. on a Sunday morning, solved the problem that I've been struggling with all of the week at work. And my manager just looked at me and was like, well, you're going home now, and you're going home for a few days. And I was really upset about it. I was like, what do you mean? I have so much to do. It's only going to make it worse. It's only going to make it worse. But my manager never had they been quite radical like this. They were very, very concrete about this. They were like, you're not coming in. I can't tell whether that's actually how concrete or radical a manager should or could be every time, but I know that it worked in my case. I stayed home. First 3 hours I was desperately on my Slack and trying to send emails, but after that I was like, okay, I'm at home anyway, I'm just gonna chill. And I was exhausted for 3 days, and so I definitely learned something about being actually quite concrete about it. So, you know, having softer conversations perhaps before, and directing my team to other resources when they need it. But if nothing's happening, you're gonna have to kind of make your heart strong and be quite concrete about the suggestion that you're trying to make. Either this is taking time off, going to speak to HR, or seeking advice otherwise, and actually just saying, well, you can't do work right now, and I don't want you to work. And it's really difficult. But
Daniel, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think that as managers, it's important to pay a lot of attention to these signs. Right? But I also think it's important to distinguish between someone who is really running toward the burnout and being burnt out, or actually experiencing chronic stress or mental anguish as a result of, for example, overworking themselves, and someone who is just finding so much, I don't know, self-actualization and enjoyment in their work that, like, right now they're choosing to spend a disproportionate amount of their time doing it. I'm not personally someone that's going to stop you from working harder if that's what you want to do with your life. I'm going to be there to tell you, hey, I'm noticing this, and I've seen this pattern before. When I was in this pattern, this is what happened to me. It may not be happening to you, but I think it's important not to necessarily conclude, because I've also had team members who wanted to work, for example, longer hours and ended up fine. So I think it's no one size fits all, I guess.
Yeah, no, I really like this point that you touched on, setting up boundaries, where you provide this extra perspective, your side of the story, so that people could take a look at the situation from another angle, but then leaving a decision to them, because that's their life and ultimately their decision. I think sometimes people who have burned out or who might experience some other issues might have this effect on the team, where they come into meetings annoyed or they start criticizing someone. How do you protect the team from such behaviors? Daniel, maybe let's start with you.
Sure. I mean, look, I think you still focus on the underlying issue. So what's driving behavior? Is it? I'm hearing a bit of echo. Is it again, is it workload? Is it that they feel like they're not being heard and there's no psychological safety in the room where they can say what they think? They feel like they're not able to, they don't have control over their, like, what is it, right? But if you've done that, if you do that check and as a manager, you've kind of exhausted the options of what you can do, and this behavior continues to persist, and it starts to border on toxicity, where they're being really negative but not constructive, I think then you just have to deal with it with a little bit of radical candor, right? Like, ultimately, it's your role as a manager. You're accountable for the output of the team. You're accountable for whatever mission your team's been charged with. If someone's going to be, if someone's going to put that at risk after you've tried to help, and they become toxic, then I think you need a bit of tough love and radical candor. That's kind of it.
Makes sense. Matleen, anything to add here?
Yeah, I mean, I really agree with everything Daniel said. I wanted to perhaps I was thinking about this just now as Daniel was speaking, and I think that once you're in this situation where someone is so burnt out or has other negative thoughts or mindsets that are starting to disrupt the team, there's only so much you can do. Like, usually it shows up in performance issues and whatever, but obviously you need to understand the underlying cause and all sorts of things. But in terms of protecting the team, it's going to be really, really difficult. When someone is already got into this mindset, it's going to affect the rest of the team. And I do think that managing is the kind of thing that is incredibly needed when times are difficult, but always starts when times are easy. In that, if you have built a really good, highly motivated, highly collaborative team with whom you have trust, that is much easier to do during easy times than the more difficult times, either individual, team level, company level, become also much easier. And so that work of avoiding this or managing this effectively starts way before things get sour, right? And so usually people, even if everybody comes across either burnout or dissatisfaction with their job, company, manager, team, the impact on the team is lesser if you've already built a a highly collaborative or trusting team with loads of psychological safety, and so the rest of the team can also support that person who's going through a difficult time.
Yeah, I really like the point about investing in the team morale and relationships up front, so that they have the sense of psychological safety and have each other backs, so that at a time of difficulties, they just come together. I think Daniel mentioned before that high performers are especially prone to burnouts and any types of anxieties. And sometimes, obviously, when they burn out, their performance would be in decline. How do you support them at the time as a manager? And what do you do when this decline in performance can no longer be tolerated? Matleen?
I think, as Daniel already earlier alluded to, right? It can happen to high performers quite a lot, but at the same time, it's every manager's job, I think, to be sufficiently close to the members of the team to know whether they're just pushing themselves, they're high achievers, they have more in them, it makes them happy to achieve and work extra hours, and they are currently in the times of their lives where this is their main priority. And how do you support them through that and actually get them to achieve loads when they're putting loads of hours in, right? And they are in a good place to do that. But then when they overdo it and start burning out and performance starts dropping, I think it's also just being able to be very candid about it and very open about it, because the trust that you build, I think, goes two ways. It's you're supporting someone who's highly performing, you're telling them how great they are, they're going to do more, they're happy. But then the moment they're not as good as they were yesterday, you should be able to point that out as early as possible and be like, hey, what's going on? Maybe you need a rest. You yourself really hard. And one of the things that I remind myself and all of my team at all times is that a career is a lifelong thing. You don't always need to be pushing yourself. Usually when people get promotions, I'm like, just relax now. Relax, take stock, think about what you want to do next, and take it easy, give yourself a moment. Don't keep pushing yourself. I think that it's fine to push yourself for a period of time and for managers to support that, but I don't think it's entirely sustainable for years and decades without sometimes going, okay, let me relax for a second. And I think a manager needs to be able to support that as well, because sometimes it's fine for performance to drop too. It's fine, people have personal circumstances, your performance can be a little bit lower, and it's okay for the person to be okay with having their performance a little bit lower, as long as it's not completely down the drain, in which case you already have a bigger problem at your hands.
Nice. Daniel?
Yeah, I think I mean if it's the case of like a high performer that's really insisting on overperforming themselves, if you tell them, hey, you should probably stop working because you seem tired, it's very unlikely to work, right? They're not the type of people that are going to respond saying, oh yeah, you're right, I'm just going to take the day off. No, I think your best bet with people like that is to just be really candid about their performance. Like, hey, I'm not telling you to stop because because I want to take control of your agenda and tell you that you need to rest. But I'm telling you because I see your performance dropping, and I know you can do better, and I think that you should perhaps sleep on this, and you'll come back even stronger with this. Like appeal to what drives them, which is that they want to be high performers, and I think that perhaps works well.
Awesome. And again, I think we're coming back to this long-term thinking. So making sure that you invest into this upfront and not at the time when an employee comes to you with this type of issue. I think one important area that we already kind of touched on is that essentially for burnout or for any kind of issue, it's better to prevent it. So what kind of guardrails a manager or the company could introduce to ensure that those types of situations happen less and less? Let's put it this way. Daniel?
Yeah, so there's a bunch of research which shows that exhaustion is just one of the reasons why people burn out, right? So lack of control, so feeling like you don't have a part in the decisions that impact your work is another one. Reward is another one, so not feeling like you're fairly compensated for the effort you make. In general, fairness and how you're treated at work, the quality of your relationships with your colleagues, like do you have friends at work? Do you feel supported by your colleagues? All of these are contributing, right? So I think as a manager, you kind of have to be running a mental check all the time, like on these dimensions that could lead to burnout, how are we tracking? Like if you're senior leader of a company, you have a lot of control over all of them, right? But if you're perhaps a more junior manager, you don't necessarily have the influence or control to change, say, the values of the company. And there's a values mismatch that could be leading to burnout. But there's certainly things you can do, right? So I think it's like within your sphere of influence and control, have it clear in your head, like what are the causes of burnout, and where does your team stand on all of them? What can you as a manager do to sort of prevent it? So for example, you may notice that you are giving a lot of positive reinforcement to one board, but not another, because I don't know, maybe you don't get on with them as well. But actually, they're doing great work, and you just don't recognize it as much. That could be contributing to their burnout. So just do a little bit of a self-check, like, what am I as a manager doing to make sure the circumstances aren't there to cause burnout?
Awesome. Matleen?
Yeah. I had the same thought that like the causes of burnout are usually so multifaceted and many things come together that there is no one single thing that you can do. I think about it as like, there's Daniel mentioned like there's reward and peer relationships, and how motivated are you to how engaged are you with your work, like how much do you like your work, how well does it match your skills, and a number of other things like the company strategy and a million things. And so I think it's the job of all managers and the company leadership to pay attention to all of them, because at any given time, for any given individual, one of them at least isn't great. And so the other things need to hold them up to make sure that they don't burn out or just come really disgruntled with their job as well and leave. And so you have to pay attention to all of them so that something, even if it's out of manager's control, falls over, the other things sustain the individual and avoid them from burning out. And the other thing that I want to re-mention is the managers often, and more so than we realize, role model behaviors. So like you yourself are a check. People will mimic what you do. If you are always sending Slack messages or emails at 9 p.m., people think that this is what is expected of them, when it might not be. So like sometimes it actually makes sense also for you to do that, because childcare responsibilities earlier in the day, and so you tell everybody, hey, I'm working at 9 p.m. or whatever. But you just need to be clear about why you're doing certain things, particularly if you're not expecting that behavior to be followed by others, particularly if it might not be a good behavior objectively, right? So I think managers really need to remember that they're role models.
Yeah, I really resonate with this point. I think very often managers might forget that, especially when they just became managers, that they are becoming role models for their people. And obviously, whatever they say and especially do would have an impact on what other people around them would do as well. I think kind of touching on the overall topic of mental health and managing and regulating your emotions, this was kind of a taboo topic a couple of years ago, but now, especially for younger employees, it's becoming kind of an expectation that a manager would be able to at least do some sort of a first aid to support them in those types of situations. In your view, what's the right way for managers to adjust to that? Maybe taking some trainings or reading more about that. Like, what's been an approach that you took to help you manage those situations better? Matleen?
Yeah, that's a topic that I care about a lot, because I am a mental health first aider. I did a mental health first aid course years ago, before COVID actually, and something that I know, because I've done a mental health first aid course, is that unless you're a trained psychologist, or you should not be giving anyone advice, essentially. And so mental health first aid isn't what people think it is, in that you shouldn't be there trying to give advice or guidance for someone who is genuinely struggling with mental health problems, unless you're unless you're trained to do so. And mental health first aid actually means that you are just assessing whether someone needs basically immediate emergency help, be it clinical or otherwise, right? And so like whether you need to basically call the ambulance right now, or otherwise send to appropriate resources, send someone to someone who can actually help them. And so the best advice I have for all managers is to actually do the mental health first aid training, to not end up in a situation where they're trying to be a therapist for someone who needs genuine trained support for their mental health, and know what the resources are where they should be actually directing people to do that. Because there is a difference between supporting someone as their manager, work-related burnout, stress, whatever, and supporting someone who's struggling with their mental health, like seriously.
Yeah, 100%. Daniel, anything to add?
I not a ton, other than I've recently heard of some companies going as far as training managers on how to deliver very basic cognitive behavioral therapy. Like, it's a very sort of rudimentary sort of 4-step type first aid intervention. Interesting to see where that goes. I think it's early days. I think there's a lot of pressure on managers, so I don't know if this is one we want to put on them too. And I agree that it's, unless you know what you're doing, it could be problematic.
Yeah, I think I read about this experiment in Harvard Business Review.
Yeah.
This kind of becoming a thing. But I think most importantly, we need to remember that managers are not psychologists. And the main purpose of those trainings is just to be able to identify the signs, but then direct people to the right person. Awesome. So I see that we are almost at time, so I have time for one more question from my side, and then we'll transition to Q&A from the audience and from the live stream. So just to wrap up this discussion, and Matleen, I think you mentioned this as well, managers also might suffer from burnout. So how do you communicate this to the team? How do you come out and say that I'm suffering and that's kind of my current state? Daniel? Let's start with you.
Yeah, I think it's tough. So my gut is be vulnerable and just share. But I think you got to be careful because I think if especially if you're not a proven leader yet for whatever reason, and by the way, people from underrepresented communities may not be proven for longer, right? So I think it's important to also highlight that it's not necessarily a level playing field. It may, if you're too vulnerable and you sort of share too much, you may you might create a perception of not being competent, and you definitely don't want that. I think you definitely want to be honest about your feelings, but it's possible to be honest about what you're feeling without disclosing too much, right? So I think kind of walking a fine, it's walking a bit of a balance between vulnerability, but at the same time, sort of consider how much you want to reveal. And by the way, there's many other resources that you can also turn to. Your team may not be the best outlet for a lot of those feelings. There's other outlets like your peers, your own manager. So yeah, I think be vulnerable, but also a little careful.
Protecting the team.
Yeah.
Matleen?
I have a kind of a funny story on this one, but my preceding thought is that it's easier to talk about your mental health or vulnerabilities when you're not currently experiencing them. So the story I have is that once I did a presentation to my whole wider team on burnout and signs of burnout. And, it was, to some extent resource, what's the sign of burnout, this and that. And then I also told my story of what are my signs of burnout? How do I start behaving when I'm actually burning out? And one of the things was that that was before COVID, is that I start forgetting to eat lunch. And you would see me in the office very late eating a burger because I'm starving at 4 or 5 p.m. And when you sit alone eating a burger in the office at 4 or 5 p.m., know that I might be burning out. And since then, every time I'm like accidentally having a late lunch or eating a burger, one or the other, someone is always coming up to me going, "Are you burning out?" And kind of funny, but like, the point is that if you I guess normalize talking about the fact that everybody can experience burnout or difficult times when they are not 100% at their best or happiest, and that's okay, and everybody's going through that. If you're talking about it when you're not going through that necessarily, it's easier to then for others to notice and bring that up and have an easy conversation with you when it's actually happening, right? Because when I'm actually burning out, I'm not admitting to anyone that I'm burning out most of the time. I try, but I'm not really. I'm like, I'm strong, I can do this, it's fine, it's nothing. And then only retrospectively I realized that I'm burning out. And yeah, that was kind of my thought on this one.
Yeah, I really like your points about, first of all, normalizing it and just having a conversation about it with the team, but also maybe sharing some of the signs that might indicate that you are in that state. And that might be a really interesting exercise for the whole team to do, to open up more and just to be able to provide this extra perspective when you notice that something is not going well. Awesome. Let's now transition into Q&A. And the first question we have is about psychological safety. So I think, Matleen, you mentioned psychological safety before. How do you define it and how do you instill it in the team?
To me, I think psychological safety is feeling okay with failing. And like, that's a very broad term, but feeling okay with failing, feeling okay with not being always the best or at your best or whatever, being okay to be being able to be open about that, and knowing that the people around you, including your manager, has your back if that happens. Most of the people I work with are overachievers, many quite introverted, but like being able to create this environment whereby people feel okay to admit when stuff's gone wrong. It might be totally unrelated to mental health or burnout, by the way. They've just made a mistake. They've just messed up, and everybody messes up at any given time. And as a manager, not crucifying anyone for it, but going, hey, you messed up, we need to fix this. And when someone gets through and fixes it, and you're able to stay actually, unemotional about it, or perhaps unemotional is the wrong word, but like not overreact to people's failures, because everybody makes mistakes, is I think how psychological safety is created, first and foremost.
How do you teach the team to react in that way?
Sorry?
How do you teach the team to react in that way?
Through examples. I think like being open to admit when you're making mistakes. I often make mistakes, or I'm bad at my job, and I just tell the team I'm being bad at my job, or I messed up. And also creating openness about talking about failures in teams. It's something that I tell all of my teams at all times, and don't actually achieve or don't actually do very well. But I want all of my teams to be celebrating failures as much as they're celebrating wins. And if you do that, then everybody feels a bit more comfortable in messing up and learning, because like failures are also, by the way, super important for learning. So when you talk about first and foremost, I think for psychological safety.
Makes sense. Daniel, anything to add here?
No, to be honest, I use the same strategies. So talk about my own for sure. When I express an opinion, I try to follow it up with, this is just an opinion. I have a lot of blind spots. I have a lot of, I may be completely wrong here. So please do challenge me. So just sort of try and always invite critique, invite challenge. That's sort of one of the things I try to do.
Awesome. I think, we have time for maybe a couple of more questions. So how do you communicate with your manager if you notice that they are having some issues, maybe with a burnout or anxiety? Is there any difference in communicating this feedback upwards? Daniel, would you like to go first?
I think no. So I think it's actually the same thing, which is, focus on observable behavior that you've noticed, and follow up with, hey, I sort of, it's led me to think that, you may be experiencing X, Y, Z. Sort of, do you want to talk about it? Maybe just flagging this to you in case you want to deal with it through another outlet. So that's that would be my approach.
Matleen, anything from your side?
I don't think I have a better answer either, to be honest. I think it's really tricky. I think like communicating these difficult messages upwards is even trickier than downwards, to be honest. So I don't know that I have or would employ a different strategy other than build trust to begin with in good times, and then you can have open conversations in difficult times. Even with your manager, I think it's possible to have those conversations upwards.
Makes sense. Another question that we have is what to do if I'm being penalized in terms of performance review while having a burnout.
Should I go?
Go ahead.
I think it's important for whoever is feeling that they're being penalized in performance reviews due to burnout to understand whether that is their perception or whether that's really the case. Because burnout and other related, I guess, like mental health issues, perhaps, well, if you can, in some cases you can categorize burnout and the mental health issues, usually also warrant taking time off or can warrant taking time off or taking it easy. And usually in companies that do performance reviews well or considerately or in a mature way, would take that into account. Anytime time off is taken into account, anytime working part-time is taken into account. You haven't achieved as many things as you would have if you were working at your 100% essentially. So like first get to the bottom of whether the burnout is being taken into account or not, genuinely in a like a, or whether you're being penalized for the burnout. And if it still feels like you are, then I think it's also important to check in whether you're currently burnt out. Because if your burnout is persistent, you're probably receiving all of the messages in a more negative light as they actually are as well. But I think it's just really important to have a conversation with your manager to really understand the rationale for the for the performance reviews that you just received, and whether it has been adjusted or not adjusted to the burnout that you experienced, or whether ultimately there is also the objective thing of performance does tend to drop, and we can't just say to someone you're doing amazingly, but well, you were burned out the half of the time, and so you know what I mean. So it's like it's really important to have the conversation with the manager, and if this is not useful, there's always HR, because you should be people team to go and be able to feel like the way your performance was evaluated was fair and accounting for any health problems that you came across during the period.
Mm-hmm. Daniel, anything to add?
Yeah, not much. I think you just, I think as an employer, you've got to have a level playing field in terms of how you assess performance. So I think if your burnout or health is contributing to that, I think you still want your employer to tell you, your manager to share that with you. But you should probably also talk to them. It should be a prompt to talk to them what you think might be driving it, and how the organizational context, the culture of the company, perhaps the culture or reality of the team is an underlying cause. And if you sort of help open up their eyes to that, they may interpret your underperformance in a different light.
Makes sense. Awesome. I think we have time for one last question, just to finalize our discussion. So how not to accidentally demotivate people? So I notice sometimes that my people are working too much, but they are also excited and passionate. How do I make sure that I prevent them from burning out, but at the same time not kill their passion and motivation? Daniel, would you like to?
Yeah, so I think it's similar to an earlier sort of thing I mentioned. I would just, again, I'd focus on, I would, probably try and not judge why they're doing what they're doing, but I would just highlight like, hey, notice that XYZ is happening. I'm concerned about that because in the past when XYZ happened, it led to something, and there's a pattern here. I'm just highlighting it to you and making sure that you know that we can talk about this if you like. But also respecting their decision to not take you up on that, because you can't force them to, right?
Yeah. Matleen, any final thoughts?
I was going to answer that from a slightly different angle, which is that one of the patterns I see managers do, and I have certainly done that in my life as well, which is managers start overprotecting people, particularly high performers and people who already have a lot of work, and then they are overprotected. They're not getting the information. Managers have the best intention in mind. They're like, I'm not going to overload them with this information or this ask from the stakeholders. Let's just put that in the backlog. Let's not worry about it. And usually what it does is that it does the opposite. People hear about those pieces of work or those projects or some other stuff happening from elsewhere, and they feel excluded. which then would contribute to burnout, for example, or for other reasons like lack of psychological safety, for example. And so they start suspecting their managers of withholding information from them because maybe there is no trust. And so one of the ways so getting that balance right is really important. Managers' job sometimes is to protect their team from being overworked and having too many people asking for work from that team. But I think that being open about it, being like, hey, we have all of this extra work that has been asked of us to do. Do you feel like you can do this or not? Or do you want to do this? Because if not, I will be backing you. Pushing back, for example, is a much better method than just like worrying that you're overloading your team with information. Everyone's adults, and everybody actually just appreciates having full context of anything that they can have full context on. And so one of the biggest things that I have seen managers, the biggest mistakes I've seen managers do in such situations is overprotecting their teams, which results in a way worse outcome than working too much.
That is such an amazing point, and I actually can relate to this as well as a manager. I think that's really important to learn to trust your team to make the decisions themselves, and just to be able to support them in any decisions they choose. So thank you for saying this point. Awesome. I think that's all the time that we have. Thank you so much, Matleen and Danielle, for joining and sharing your insights. And thank you so much, our audience, for watching us and attending the session and the summit overall. I think with this, just wanted to say thank you to the whole team, which was in the background organizing this amazing event and putting everything together. We really hope that you had a great time listening to our speakers' incredible stories, advice, and just learning through their stories and their mistakes as well. One last thing that I just wanted to ask you before we say goodbye. We are running an open survey to get an in-depth understanding of people management trends and practices within the tech industry. Those insights will help us to create a comprehensive report that we'll share with all the participants in February. So please participate, share your voice, and get access to those insights. It's only 10 minutes, and you will contribute a lot to understanding of the whole field. Thank you so much again, and hope to see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.